All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Let's call to order the final meeting of the day of the Finance Committee. This is where the true stalwarts of the MTA board and members of our staff show their true stripes. Mark Herbst, thank you very much for your efforts. Norman, Albert, to the bitter end. We unfortunately do not have a quorum, but I will still call the meeting to order. And so I don't think we've ever done this before, at least in finance, at least in my tenure, but we will not be taking votes on any of the actions brought before us because of the lack of a quorum, but we will have staff recommend their recommendations, and they'll be brought forth to the full board on Wednesday. So with that in mind, David, would you tell us about any public speakers?
Certainly. We have 11 public speakers today, 2 in
Well,
person.
at least they came and stayed for us.
Yes, well, 2 stayed for us, 2 in person, 9 virtual. The first speaker is Lisa Daglian, who will be followed by Jason Anthony.
Because you're interested in active public, also state. Good evening. I'm Lisa Dagley, and I'm the Executive Director of the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA PCAC. Today, we should be celebrating the June 30th start of congestion pricing and the revenue and other benefits it will bring, but no. And it's only going to get worse as the week goes on. In case there was any doubt, toll revenues are higher than they were in 2019 because more people are driving than ever before, creating more congestion and more climate crisis. Unfortunately, revenue on transit is lower than anticipated, in large part because people still aren't paying their fares. It's critical that fare evasion be drastically reduced. The fare box revenue is essential for the operating budget that's going to take a hit without congestion pricing. Those funds will be needed to pay down early debt service. Way too much money is walking through the slam gates, hopping over turnstiles, and breezing past bus drivers. But even if it was all recouped, it wouldn't be possible to bond that money out to fund the MTA's capital program. You can't bond a fare revenue crackdown. This handy IOU can't be bonded out either. This month's agenda doesn't include significant actions for capital projects, and we're very concerned that the further out we get, the harder it will be to get started and restarted. Companies staffed up in anticipation of jobs, but several construction companies were just told to stand down. Obviously, this is not a situation of your doing or liking, but it's terrible, and riders across the system are going to be the ones to suffer. As the MTA's finances suffer, so too will the region, with MTA dollars flowing to every single congressional and state Senate district in 147 of 150 assembly districts. This pause is already beginning to have economic development and financial repercussions across the state. We thought the days of angst over the fiscal cliff were over, along with the agita experience before the 2019 vote on the legislation. But now, just like then, it's an easy fix. Congestion pricing now.
Thank you. Our second speaker is Jason Anthony, who will be followed by Susan Zhuang.
Hey, Neil. Good afternoon, Kevin. Thank you, Neil. Luckily, I stayed to the end. Let's make this simple. This past weekend, yours truly had the worst nightmare ever. Let's make this short. 2 days in a row, I saw huge amount of passengers entering through the rear door on the M42 at 12th Avenue West 42nd Street. Imagine that if we had all buses of passengers doing that and not having congestion pricing in effect. That'll be, in words of our beloved Chairman and CEO, John Lieber, the worst fiscal cliff ever. Imagine that in the worst case scenario. And then we having the New Jersey Transit Corporation implementing their fare hike in the next couple of days. And then they're having a meltdown that times 3 last week. Imagine that. But I would love to say, let's get our things together, do the common good for our beloved Empire State. I know, Kevin, you will do the correct thing for our state. Let's get things done, and let's get congestion pricing approved the correct way. I'll see you guys on Wednesday.
Thank you. I have the list of speakers, so the next speaker who's online is Theo Allen, who will be followed by Charlton D'Souza.
Thank you for those who stayed, and the MTA has things even worse. What caused all the price hikes on previous things such as Second Avenue Subway, Eddyside Access especially? Stopping and restarting. And Second Avenue has been suspended and other contractors have been told to stand down. Now, what does congestion pricing pay for? Well, according to the 2023 contract, over $100 million for 37 elevators. Really? If you want to meet your 2055 goal of full accessibility on the subway, you can spend 10% of the congestion pricing funds, and even with $1 billion, that means it's 80%, and then just 10% of that's 80 million. That's how you get full accessibility on the subway. How do you get the CLCPA goals done of full bus electrification? You need money to get all of the things in the bus maintenance facilities done, and you need new buses. You can't do that without capital funding, which comes from congestion pricing. No congestion pricing means that the MTA doesn't have the revenue to do what it needs to do. Thank you for hearing this comment.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Charlton D'Souza, who will be followed by Maddie Bucky's Highland.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charlton D'Souza, President of Passengers United. And as you all know, we're against congestion pricing. And the reason why we're against congestion pricing, one, I served on the Environmental Justice Committee for the MT on congestion pricing. And 2 years ago, we were asking simple questions. Are you going to add more bus service, more train service? Are you going to issue discounted fares? You guys took away the Atlantic ticket, the weekly. That was the first straw failure. And, it's just been failure after failure after that. And one thing all these so-called advocates from all these other organizations are not talking about is the MTA in 2008 was the 5th largest debitor in the United States. And since then, the amount that the MTA owes the banks has increased substantially. That's that. And then you have other issues going on. So, we just feel like there's a lot of discrimination going on. And why is it Uber, Lyft, and the for-hire vehicles have been given a carve-out? And many of these so-called environmental advocates that have been speaking for congestion pricing are getting money from Uber, Lyft, and the for-hire vehicles. I find that kind of odd. And what I also find kind of strange is all these nonprofits are also getting funded by MTA contractors. So the name of the game is play by scheme. So everybody's getting money, everyone's, benefiting so they can get congestion pricing. This whole thing is the biggest con job of a lifetime. That's why it's called congestion pricing. And we're going to keep being persistent, and we're going to keep protesting outside our elected officials' offices. We do not support congestion pricing. The MT has millions and billions of dollars being squandered and wasted in overpaid contracts. Why don't you try to reduce your contracts expenditures and get them on time? Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Maddie Bucky's Highland, who will be followed by Kathleen Irwin.
David. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Maddie W. Bucky's Highland. Earlier today, actually, I spoke at the Bridges and Tunnels Committee meeting, in relation to the pause on congestion pricing. To give you a perspective, congestion pricing was part of the budget that was signed by former Governor Andrew Cuomo in 2019 as part of Chapter 59 of the laws of 2019. At that time, the MTA Bridges was led by the acting president, Danny DiCrescenzo. At the MTA was led by Chairman and CEO Patrick J. Foy and the Chief Financial Officer Robert E. Bob Foran. Anyway, that could really be I recently heard that if it's not implemented on Sunday, I know City Comptroller Brad Lander will take action on it to get it passed through the finish line. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I hope everybody has a good 4th of July weekend, and God bless each and everyone. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kathleen Irwin, who will be followed by Dennis Siri.
Good afternoon. My name is Kathleen Irwin. I'm with the New York State Restaurant Association, and I'd like to take a moment to remark on congestion pricing. Our association represents members across the state, including in the city, and we have members in Manhattan south of 60th Street who would be directly impacted by congestion pricing. Over the months leading up to the expected implementation of congestion pricing, there was a lot of fear and anxiety about how congestion pricing would impact their restaurants from both an operational and cost perspective and from a customer foot traffic perspective. In particular, we heard the following concerns: that making and receiving deliveries would become more expensive, that scheduling deliveries during business hours would become more difficult, that customers driving in from outside the congestion zone, especially those driving in only for leisure, would limit or eliminate trips into the congestion zone and therefore harm the foot traffic at restaurants. Thank you for taking the time to hear those concerns.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Dennis Siri.
Thank you for having me and for having this meeting. I am speaking just on behalf of the Suffolk County Village officials also, and I'm the mayor with the Village of Amityville. Congestion pricing is not a bad idea. I think it needs to be done in a way just to help people decide to use alternate forms of transportation. But I think the idea of holding off on it for right now is not a bad decision, because it probably needs a little more ironing out, such as when they pushed bail reform out. And bail reform, as we see, there were a couple issues that had to be adjusted with that and still need to be adjusted. But we're here to talk about congestion pricing. And I think we should get everything ironed out, such as Charlton mentioned, about maybe some type of discount for people that have to go down every day into the area where it will be affected, and maybe some monthly rates. I know you're going to add more trains for people that are using the trains and the subway system now, and are you going to have them coming by more frequently? I'm not sure how much of this is already in effect and already planned. And then also, I'm a retired firefighter also, and I would like to say something for any first responders or any essential workers that are working down in that area. I don't think it's fair that they need to get affected by this and have to pay the extra money just to go to work every day. Plus, besides the fact that all the delivery people too, they should get some type of benefits that wouldn't hurt them so much, where the cost is going to be passed on to the consumer. So they're just some of my concerns with the congestion pricing, but I think it needs to go forward to help the MTA out overall, but it needs to be thought out better. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. That concludes the public speaking section.
All right, thank you, David. Thank you very much. We will skip the minute approval until next month, as that's not we don't have a quorum for that. Next up, we'll hit Budget Watch. If I just may for a moment, as a prelude, David, just say a couple of things. Obviously, there's an elephant in the room when we talk in the Finance Committee at the MTA, and since there's very few people in this room, there's room for a much bigger elephant. And in this case, I can't come up with a bigger elephant than that of the loss of our capital funding, at least a significant portion of it in congestion pricing. I bring this up now just because I think what we haven't really thought about, or talked about, I should say, and it will be something we will be talking about at the July plan, is how that change of funding not only affects obviously the capital plan, but eventually will affect our operating budget. And that will show up in the not too distant future. And I just want to make clear to everyone, when we look at our charter of the Finance Committee, we have a number of responsibilities. The number one responsibility is to review, quote, review the MTA's annual budget and ensure that the MTA operates on a self-sustaining basis as required by applicable law and with the support of various levels of government. That is our number one responsibility as a committee. And so I take that seriously as the chair of this committee. I know the members of this committee do as well. And I think we have to be mindful that that change led outside of the MTA is something we're going to have to work on. I know the staff, I know Kevin and Jay and many, many hundreds of people are probably working on this diligently to assess the implications of the loss of congestion pricing's funding on the operating plan. And so I think I maybe Jay, just give us a minute, maybe if you wouldn't mind, about what some of those levers are, because I think it's worthy of us thinking about this, because they may not be as obvious to some folks here or the public as may be apparent.
Thank you, Chair. And as you said, as part of the July plan, we'll probably bring a thoughtful presentation to the committee and the board for further discussion of the full impacts, hopefully, of the congestion pricing pause to the financial plan. Just to highlight a couple of things that we're thinking about from the finance side and the impacts on the operating budget is congestion pricing infrastructure. We know there's capital costs associated with the infrastructure, the maintenance costs, as well as contracts, and then staffing, whether that's in-house or the contracted staff. There's a couple different ways that we fund that, and mostly congestion pricing was dedicated to be funded from the lockbox. So we're also thinking about how that impacts capital and operating. Another thing that we're focused on is the debt service costs. As many of you can recall, the MTA was going to issue debt as the last piece of the funding for the $55 billion capital program. With the pause on congestion pricing, we would have to move up our own issuance of debt, and that would be an impact to the operating budget for debt service costs incurred earlier in the financial plan than originally thought about and anticipated. Fare box revenue. As part of congestion pricing, we anticipated to see an increase in our subway, bus, and railroad ridership in the financial plan. So there will be an impact on ridership, which would lead to a change in our fare box revenue assumptions. We anticipated about 1.25% of ridership increase from the movement of people from cars onto our public transportation. So we'll look at that in more depth and bring that to your attention in the July plan. A couple other things that we're thinking about are staffing levels, the capital plan. There's about 7,300 employees that are reimbursed by the capital program. That's over $2 billion of reimbursed capital funds that come into the operating budget for their time and efforts as working on the capital program. And then something that we're also thinking about is the operating maintenance impacts from the delay of or pause of the capital program, particularly around signals, any fleet purchases, and any other impacts as we start seeing sort of the pause or deprioritization of the capital program.
Any questions on that? Please, Andrew.
When you mentioned the change in the amount of people that were likely going to switch to mass transit and the fares achieved by that, are you assuming the same or a better, in other words, a reduced level of fare evasion when you anticipate those numbers?
So I think one of the things that we had built, there's multiple factors that we build into our fare box revenue assumptions, and you have been here for the McKinsey projections that we've been presenting, and there's fare evasion built into the midpoint that we've been using. But in addition to that, we had anticipated mode shift from vehicles into our subways, buses, and the railroads. And so that is the piece that we're thinking about adjusting. In addition, as you've you'll hear from David in a moment that fare box revenue itself isn't coming on budget for subways and buses. So we'll be looking at all the factors that affect fare box and making adjustments and bring a detailed presentation on sort of those levers and changes.
And the last thing you mentioned, which was the car equipment issue, the longer our 46s and M3s remain in service, the more they're going to cost to keep up,
Exactly, because
as opposed to new equipment.
Exactly. We do, our maintenance planning around vehicle fleet, new versus old, and that will be impactful on our selective maintenance schedules and RCM for the railroad. So we're looking at all those impacts to come to you with a full analysis.
Thank you.
However, I'd like to point out it's often an overtime gold mine for the guys that stick around. Keeping that junk running is, good money.
Mark, you want to ask something?
Yeah, well, that's one of the issues. I think there's confusion in the public, the difference between the operating budget and the capital program. The capital program was associated with congestion pricing, and I just wish the education would be out there that's even greater. But there is an effect that you've clearly pointed out, and Mr. Chairman, you did as well, about the connection between the two. There is going to be a loss on the operating side. The maintenance, of course, it's going to be extended. We're going to have to pay more overtime to fix those machines and equipment, everything, switches, rails, anything that's needed. That's not going to be repaired through the capital improvements. The overtime probably will increase, and that's going to be a cost. There's also a concern that I have with the program that if you stop the delivery of the capital programs, there's going to be task assignments. What's in the process right now with job delivery? Now everyone's going to have to put things on pause that were not anticipated, things in state of good repair. The normal bid process is going to be delayed because personnel are going to be working on other things and working on things that are going to affect the program. So I am concerned about those types of issues that are taking place. And hopefully we will see a revenue source that's going to replace this, that our public officials have said they're looking for and searching. Where that answer comes from, I don't know. But the final point I just want to make, or question I have, is regarding the loss of, or the lost opportunity of the matching funds from the federal programs. What is that going to do to the program, the existing capital program and the future one that we're looking to develop at this point?
I think in terms of the federal matching, that'll be presented more by C&D at Wednesday's board meeting. But generally, the approach is, we're working hard to, preserve as much of our federal funds as possible. Some categories like the formula funds are much easier to reallocate to the core projects that we need to get done, and then it's the discretionary federal money that we've got to make sure we're working with the FTA to keep in place if there's some delays in us being able to provide a local match.
Thanks for the questions, Mark. And I think you catch it correctly that I'm raising these issues not to be pedantic and not to hassle people, but to raise them for the public's consumption. However the public hears about it, whether from us, to the press, to the advocates, that this issue related to the capital plan, which is obviously out of the hands of the MTA, will not only affect what we use the capital for explicitly, but will affect the operating budget. And as David will now walk us through Budget Watch, or what we formerly called Budget Watch, I think you can see, regardless of the capital plan, things are not as great as they think. I describe it, without taking any more of your thunder away, as a tale of two cities, or at least multiple cities, that we have in the numbers. So would you walk us through them, please?
Certainly. Year-to-date May 2024 preliminary results were unfavorable by $83 million, while the month of May was favorable by $29 million. In March, there was a favorable accounting adjustment of $43 million, and without that one-time adjustment, May year-to-date would have been $125 million unfavorable. Operating revenues on a year-to-date basis were $35 million, or 1% favorable. Passenger revenues were $57 million unfavorable, which was offset by favorable toll revenue of $34 million and favorable other operating revenue of $58 million. As a reminder, the adopted budget includes a provision of $100 million for 2024 to offset unfavorable passenger revenue results. In May, operating revenues were $25 million, or 4% favorable. Passenger revenues were $500,000 unfavorable, while toll revenue was $4 million unfavorable, and other operating revenue was $30 million favorable. Subway and both commuter railroads exceeded their passenger revenue forecasts in May, while New York City Transit bus and MTA bus were unfavorable. The unfavorable toll revenue results reflect a delay in the processing of intermediate tolls and the timing of a bad reserve allocation for unpaid tolls. The favorable results for other operating revenue reflect favorable city reimbursement for paratransit operations to cover higher paratransit operating expenses, advertising revenue, and station retail revenue, as well as insurance reimbursement related to Tropical Storm Ida that were received by New York City Transit in the month of May. Operating subsidies year-to-date through May were $148 million, or 5% unfavorable. Most of this result is attributable to the MRT and the urban taxes, which collectively were $103 million unfavorable of the $148 million total. There were also unfavorable results for the payroll mobility tax, MTA aid, the for-hire vehicle surcharge, and automated camera enforcement. These were partially offset by favorable results for the petroleum business tax, which includes a receipt of $36 million that we received in early January that reflects a payment that we should have received back in December 2023. Investment income was also favorable by $21 million. Of note, the payroll mobility tax, which was unfavorable by $29 million year-to-date through May, will be slightly favorable to budget when we report next month. For May, operating subsidies, including investment income, were $37 million, or 4% unfavorable. Capital subsidies year-to-date through May were $12 million unfavorable, reflecting unfavorable receipts from the mansion tax. Operating expenses year-to-date through May were favorable by $45 million, which is less than 1%. Without the one-time favorable accounting adjustment of $43 million in March, year-to-date May results would have been $2 million favorable, while May expenses were $56 million favorable. Debt service was $14 million unfavorable through May and was $16 million favorable for May, reflecting the timing of debt service accruals. And there's further information in the financial performance report.
Thank you, David. Our CFO probably wants to amplify a couple of those messages, please.
Thanks, Neil, and thanks, David. Yeah, as you mentioned, next month we'll roll out the July plan, which is really the mid-year update. So we take the kind of the results year to date and any other changes and reforecast them. So looking forward to next month, again, it's what Jay mentioned. We're going to have to look at how congestion pricing impacts the overall operating budget. But that said, as Neil pointed out, that we're not, the operating budget is having other challenges that congestion pricing will just add to. And the big ones is that we've discussed is the real estate taxes, the mortgage recording tax, and the urban tax or real estate transfer tax. If it stays at this pace, it's going to be a little over $300 million lower than we budgeted, which is $600 million lower than 2022's number already. So we're seeing this huge hit to the real estate taxes. And then the other big challenge is that we've talked about is on the fare box revenue, primarily at transit, where Subway had a slightly better month in May, but we're watching closely whether paid ridership, how we still are projecting we need growth out of the Subway ridership, and then the bus paid ridership is clearly suffering and continuing to suffer because of the fare evasion. So we'll kind of walk through all the adjustments that we need to make on projected both projected tax revenue, projected fare box revenue, than all the other impacts. And, expect July plan, will be, quite a different picture than, the, 5 years of balanced budgets that we were able to show prior.
What an incredible contrast to a year ago when we had 5 years of a balanced budget compared to where we are now. And I think well, all we can do today, yeah, exactly, Andrew. Thank you for that. I think it's a question, an analytical question. So, if you look at the charts, and David, I thank you for putting these up. I think maybe next time when you present it to the Budget Watch, I actually think you should walk through these midpoint charts because I think they're very important and the data is very clear. We've been trending 11 months now under the midpoint for subway paid ridership, for example. So it's now a systemic problem that we're tracking underneath, not dramatically, but we're tracking underneath. And the analytical question, which may be difficult to get at, so I'm not going to be difficult about the question, which is how much do we know is from being under this line is fare evasion, meaning effectively the price people pay, people who evade the fare pay zero, right, versus quantity of those who are actually physically using the system and those who are shirking, like saying, I don't want to go down there because of safety, or I use a paid hire vehicle, or I walk, or I use micro-mobility. And again, I'm not asking for it now, but I would like, if we have the way to answer that question, I think it'd be useful to understand what is the fare evasion component of our underperformance versus midpoint, and what's the pure ridership. Do you have a sense?
No, I think what I wanted to say was I think you'll see a full analysis of that in the July plan. So let us put some slides together and give you better information than off the cuff.
I'm going to talk to the general counsel because I think she has maybe able to help us get a better time slot at the. Can you do that with us? Maybe we can get a better time slot because I feel like this is going to be a pretty important meeting, the July plan. I'd love to get want to get an audience together. I'm in the media business. I like to have an audience. It won't be at 4 anymore. Okay, great. Well, this at least not for July. That's okay. July is what we need. Anyway, speaking of that, David Good, Olga, please walk us through what used to be called Finance Watch.
Hello, everyone. Today I'm reporting on 2 upcoming bond transactions scheduled to be executed in July. And just to be clear, these transactions do not relate to the accelerated bond issuance Jay noted. These are refunding transactions or transactions refinancing outstanding notes. So currently we're working on an 800 million refunding transaction that is expected to refund outstanding bonds, including bonds issued as Build America bonds, pursuant to the refunding authorization approved by the board last month. This transaction will be led by book running senior manager JP Morgan. And later in July, we also expect to price dedicated tax fund bonds, which will pay off outstanding 426 million of bond anticipation notes, which will be due in August. As always, I will be back to the committee reporting results of these transactions once executed. This concludes my remarks. Let me know if there are any questions.
Questions? Hearing none, David, back to you. All agency items. Thank you, Olga.
There's one non-procurement item this month that we would have been requesting approval for if there was a quorum. It's to pay the New York assessment on the MTA and its constituent agencies for the calendar year 2024 to the Public Work Enforcement Fund. Chapter 511 of the laws of 1995 as amended requires state agencies and authorities to pay an assessment based on 0.1% of the value of public work construction projects entered into, which excludes rolling stock contracts. The assessments reimburse the State Department of Labor for its costs in enforcing the state's prevailing wage law. Per agreement with the state, annual MTA payments are based on the estimated amount of public work contracts and are adjusted to reflect the actual experience from the prior year. MTA estimates the 2024 assessment to be $1,608,341. In 2023, the estimated 2023 assessment of $5.2 million was more than the actual assessment of $3.6 million by $1.6 million. This true-up of $1.6 million, when deducted from the estimated 2024 assessment of $1.6 million, requires a total payment of $14,365, which we are requesting the authorization to pay by the July 1st payment deadline.
Thanks very much. Again, we're not going to vote on anything. We're just going to say thank you, and if anyone has any questions. Sir?
Yeah, just to clarify for my ears, I guess. That means we picked up the failure of the contractors to pay prevailing wage? Is that?
This fund is used by the State Department of Labor to enforce the prevailing wage, so it's their expenses. So we're
basically an insurance plan?
It's for their employees to investigate, I believe. That's what it's for.
Thanks very much, David. Lizette, all agency and headquarters procurements, please.
There's one action this month for MTA headquarters for Finance Committee recommendation, I guess, for the full board to approve in the estimated amount of $5 million. This action is found in the June 2024 Finance Committee book. This item is the extension of a miscellaneous service contract awarded to TDX Construction Corporation for the Small Business Mentoring Program Management for a period of up to 6 months through March 31st, 2025. Funding in the amount of $5 million will also be added. The purpose of the requested funding and extension are to ensure that the mentoring program continues during the request for proposal process to award a replacement contract, and two, to provide ample transitioning time for vendors and ongoing projects currently managed by the incumbent, TDX, should a new vendor be selected. Under this program, which is managed by MTA Construction and Development, qualified organizations are trained and assisted in competing for larger and more complex MTA construction management projects. The current contract price structure will remain consistent and unchanged for this extension. The total estimated cost is consistent with the rate of spend from previous years.
Great. Any questions? Hearing none, Lizette, you can continue.
Sure. There are two information items for the Railroad Committee as follows. The first item is a request that the board approve the award of a 2-year contract for a continuous work platform from Metro North to Loram Maintenance of Way, Inc. The second item is a request that the board approve the award of a contract for rail vacuum services to Loram Maintenance of Way, Inc. for the needs of both Long Island Railroad and Metro North. There are 4 items for New York City Transit this month approved by its respective committee. The first 2 items are requests that the board approve the award of 3-year miscellaneous service contracts to Clever Devices Limited and Via Nova Technologies, GmbH, for the provision of maintenance and support services related to digital information screen systems installed on buses. The third item is a request that the board approve the exercise of options 1 and 2 of the SAG Corrector Service Agreement for the Department of Subways awarded to Turtle & Hughes, Inc., in order to add 2 additional 5-year maintenance periods. And the final item is a request that the board approve the exercise of option years for Arrow, Inc., Corporate Transportation Group Limited, and Fijost, LLC, DBA, Century Management Solutions, for the provision of broker car service for paratransit accessoride service, and extend the contract with Bell Linda, DBA Islander Transportation, for the provision of broker car service for accessoride service on Staten Island for the same period. There are no information items for B&T this month.
Thank you, Lizette. Any questions? Hearing none, Mr. Florio, bring us home with the real estate items.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, real estate has 2 transactional action items for consideration and approval. The first is for MTA Metro North Railroad, and is a lease with Airport Mart for retail space in the Hartsdale Station building. The second action item is for MTA Long Island Railroad, and is a license with North Ferry Company for the operation of a ferry terminal in Greenport. There are, in addition, 10 information items, and let me note that information items brought to the committee and board are done directly, the transaction is done directly by the real estate department pursuant to board policy. These transactions have already been completed and reporting back. The first 3 information items are for MTA Metro North Railroad and include a second amendment to the license with Access One Solutions for ATMs at Croton Harmon, Tarrytown, and Yonkers, a short-term parking permit between Metro North and Dia Art Foundation for the use of parking spaces at the Beacon Station, a license between M&R and MLF Properties for the reconstruction of a retaining wall in Portchester. The fourth and fifth information items are for MTA Long Island Railroad and include an easement between the Long Island Railroad and 166 Archer Avenue in connection with the Jamaica Capacity Improvement Project Phase 2, and an easement between the Long Island Railroad and the State of New York in support of the Jamaica Capacity Improvement Project Phase 2. And the next four information items are for MTA New York City Transit. They include a temporary access agreement between Transit and Bennett Property Owner LLC for access to property adjacent to 181st Street Subway Station in connection with the ADA elevator project in Manhattan. A construction access agreement between Transit and DCAS for underpinning of 209 Girolamo Street in Brooklyn in support of ADA improvements at the Borough Hall Subway Station. The addition of property located at 210 Girolamo Street in Brooklyn to the master lease with the City of New York in support of ADA improvements also at the Borough Hall Subway Station. And lastly, a lease amendment between Transit and Jomat LLC for a parking lot, employee parking lot adjacent to PS 248 Transit Learning Center in Brooklyn. The final information item is the report on agreements entered into directly by the Real Estate Department pursuant to board policy.
Thank you. Please, Andrew.
Yeah, David, in the future, I think it would be helpful if, when you're doing something like the easement for 181st Street, since there's two 181st Street stations, if you had put A train.
Okay.
Because I read further, it's Fort Washington Avenue, and obviously that's the A train, but not everybody would know that. But with a glance, if it just says that, it would be just easier.
Understood.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions? All right, hearing none, thank you,
Yep.
Dave. Oh,
Just a quick question, if you clarify a little bit about the ferry terminal for me.
Right now, there's only one operator that operates ferry service from Greenport to Shelter Island. And the current agreement has been there for quite some time. They are the only operator, and it made sense to basically extend the existing license
But the
agreement.
property is owned by the Long Island Railroad?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
all right, great. Thank you, David. As always, very thoughtful. Any questions, further questions for David? Hearing none. Any new business for the committee? Hearing none. Since we don't have a quorum, I don't need to ask for a motion to adjourn, so just say bye-bye and buy bonds, and thank you.